Listen, I'm only here for the likes. It's episode 23 of For Our Edification. Thanks for joining For Our Edification. I'm Eddie Francis. Make sure that you check it out on your favorite podcast platform. And listen, download the show, rate it, share it with friends, all that good stuff. You can find this episode and past episodes at eddiefrancis.com/For Our Edification. Get a job in social media, they said. It'll be just like doing your own social media, they said. It'll be fun, they said. Well, that's not what the guest on this episode quite believes himself, because he is an actual social media manager for a brand, and he's done it for several other brands. You know, he really puts into perspective how something that seems like it's so much fun can be so challenging. Let's welcome our next guest on this episode of For Our Edification. The views and opinions expressed on For Our Edification do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the hosts, guests, or any entities with which we are affiliated. For Jon-Stephen Stansel, social media is serious business. As a matter of fact, it is his business, and it has been for about a decade. JS started his social media career in higher education, and he has done so for several different brands. And right now, he is one of the most prominent voices when it comes to social media management. He is a social media strategist, a marketer, a content creator, and he is the director of social media at Chaotic Good Studios. He's also the co-host of a pretty cool podcast that I've had the opportunity to be a guest on, the Thought Feeder podcast, which offers insights on digital marketing and higher education. Here's the conversation that I had with JS. Let's start with the basics. How did you get into social media and get paid for it and get paid fairly for it?
Okay. Those are two very big different questions. This was not my plan. My plan was to get my PhD and start teaching literature. And I was teaching English as a second language at a university at the time. And this was 2008. And started noticing my students weren't paying attention to me. They were paying attention to their phones. And I didn't want to be Wyatt Earp, like in the movie Tombstone or actual history, and going in like collecting phones, like he was collecting guns as people were going into Tombstone.
Yeah.
Because other teachers in my department were doing just that, and I was like, well, how can I teach them how to use their phone as a tool and not a toy? And I started creating Facebook groups for my classes and started create a Facebook page for that department, and little by little started doing more and more. Like my boss said, hey, why don't you do this to try and recruit more international students to our program? Why don't you do this to recruit, to get more students to sign up for their advising meetings and run social for the advising center? Why don't you do social for admissions? And I'm like, hey, why don't I run social for the entire university? And they said, well, we don't have that position. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go find a school that does. And I did. I went to Texas State University, ran social media there for a few years. Went to the Texas Department of Transportation. There's nothing you can say to me that will hurt my feelings after that. And then went back. The school I was originally at, University of Central Arkansas, made the position, came back home. During COVID, like a lot of people, I kind of did some soul searching and wanted to move on to the next phase of my career, and quit without a plan, but got offered a freelance job working on the Amazon Prime video television series Invincible, which I could not turn down, saying I'm a huge comic book nerd. And that led me to working in the entertainment industry, where I now work for Chaotic Good Studios as director of social media there, where I can't talk a lot about that. I'm under a lot of NDAs, but I get to work on some really cool projects and really fun stuff. And, as far as like getting paid fairly, I hate to say it, but moving out of higher ed was how I did it.
Yeah.
And try as they might, higher ed can only offer so much. And it's a shame, because you really do. It gets to the point, I was part of the soul searching was I asked myself, like, if I stay in this position at this university, where am I going to be in 5 years? And the realistic answer was exactly where I was, with maybe making a couple $1,000s more a year if I'm lucky, or getting promoted if my boss quits or gets promoted and I luck into that job. So, as much as it pained me, it was time to leave higher ed and do something else, which as much as I miss higher ed, I get to work on superhero shows now. So
I was about to say, so you would officially be my son's hero because he loves Invincible. He loves it.
oh, so much fun.
So all right, so I gotta let him know I met somebody who was like working on the show for him. Um, so let's go to the not to trigger you, but let's go back to the days of working social media in higher ed, which I did briefly when I was in between social media coordinators. That is one of the most interesting places to do it because it's like you're doing social media for a small city. People, the part that I want you to talk about is the difference between doing your own social media and doing it for an institution of higher learning. One of the missteps I have seen often is I have seen people hire someone to do a social media job and they're like, well, yeah, I saw their Instagram and it looks like they really know what they're doing. Talk about it.
The difference is huge. It's enormous. Just because I compare it to like being a mechanic versus just driving a car. Like we all can drive a car. We can get from point A to point B. We can put gas in it. Maybe we can change the oil if we're really savvy. But if there's something that goes wrong with the car, you've got to take it to a mechanic. And that's what a social media manager is versus an average user. Like we know the ins and outs, the inner workings of social media. So that the difference is huge. Like I've been in the same sort of thing where people are like, oh, their Instagram account is great, but personally, it's very different than running it for a university or any brand because at the end of the day, with your personal account, it's you on the line, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
you have total control of it. You're steering the ship. Whatever you put up there is on you. If you say something stupid, you're the person that has to account for that, and vice versa. If you're running it for a brand, and I love your comparison. I use it too of universities like running social for a small city. You are the voice of the brand. You are the voice of the university. So it's not just, tweeting out or posting a photo of whatever comes to your head that day. Although sometimes it can be if once you've got enough experience and you know what's going to, you can only do that after you've trained and have the experience and know, okay, I can get away with this. I can't do this. And this is what the voice of the brand is, because you don't own that, right? That's not you. And you have to take it with the utmost level of seriousness and understanding that like it's a huge responsibility. Like you can say something that hurts the school pretty easily if you're not careful. So I think that's a big part of it. And like you said, it's like running social for a small city. It's much harder than like running social for a coffee shop or even Invincible, where it's like there is at a university, you have admissions, you have housing, you have IT, you have the library, you have all of these things that are going on. A transportation department, even.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
you've got all of these things. It always made me laugh. Like people would leave Facebook reviews for the university and be like, "Not enough parking, 1 star," and it's like visiting New York City and going, I went to one restaurant that had bad service. 1 star for the whole city.
Exactly.
You can't do that.
But I saw Cats and it was great.
5 stars.
Exactly, 5 stars. So the part so here's the thing that was so interesting. I remember when I was hiring my current social media person, I remember I worked up all these questions for the interview, and they were all based on emotional intelligence and customer service. And someone looks at it and they go, why are you asking these questions? There's not one question here about anything having to do with content and all that stuff. And they need to be able to make us go viral. And I said, okay, first of all, the whole going viral, that's not a thing. Let's start with that. But the second thing is, do you know what it's like to run a social account for an institution of higher learning? Have you been in the seat when some student says, this place is crap and blah, blah, blah. And they at the university and that whole thing. And then they go on and they do a thread on how bad things are at the university. And then it's some student who just simply didn't follow directions for something, right? And so, my whole philosophy was to find somebody who could be level-headed so that when they saw these tweets, when they saw these posts, they could just say, oh, okay. And then they could just act appropriately, like come to me and say, okay, hey, here's what we have going on. The thing that I am proudest of with the person who I was able to hire is that she has come through like a champ. I mean, something will go down. She'll come to me and say, hey, this is what happened. And I can tell it gets to her, but she holds really steady. And to me, that is just such an important quality for anybody who's running social media. And what the user does not understand is how easy it is to internalize the stuff that comes at you on social media. Even if you are getting a paycheck for it, it still feels like they're attacking you and not the brand.
A lot of that is just linguistics. It's, when we tweet for the brand, we say, we. It's
exactly
first person plural. But when it comes back, it is you. You are bad at your job. They'll even say, like, if they don't like the tweet, oh, I hate it. They'll say, fire your intern, right? or even when they're complimenting you, like, I get, comments like the invincible intern needs a raise. And it's like, thank you, but I actually have a master's degree and I've been doing this for 10 years, So yeah, it is very difficult. And I think you're right, being level-headed, restraint, but also, yes, that emotional intelligence, because there's so much going on social that the average user doesn't see. University admins may see the posts that, the major posts and things like that, but they're not seeing what we're doing in the replies sometimes. When a student says, hey, I just got accepted to University A and University B, I'm trying to decide where to go. And you jump in and go, hey, if you have any questions about our university, that one-on-one, there's so much magic there. Or a student does, go on that giant rant and you can level-headedly say, hey, have you tried calling the advising center yet? And pointing them gently in the right direction. You can turn that around and make that a positive. And other students are looking at that too. So somebody who's level-headed, another perfect example, it's been having ice storms for the past 3 days here in Arkansas. And this is the time where I do not miss working in higher ed at all, because my phone would have been blowing up with, have you canceled school yet? Why isn't school canceled? Yeah. And we are on the receiving end of all of these questions that are way above our pay grade, right? Yeah. The social media manager does not cancel classes and is not even in the room when that decision's being made. So it's important to know, as a social media manager, one, I think upper level admin need to be in the social media manager's office almost, or call them the social media manager to their office almost every other day, of like, hey, what's the pulse of campus, right? Yeah. Hey, we are thinking, we're watching the weather here. Let's craft a statement that we can put out that we can agree upon while we're making that decision. It's PR 101, right? You keep people informed. Like, no information is still information, right? Saying, we're still in the process. We will let you know once we decide. And if the social media manager doesn't have that information, like, or the go ahead, to reply to that, you run into a lot of angry people. Like, why aren't you listening? Students have really been accustomed to brands on social media replying. If they, say, hey, at, Wendy's, I got my order wrong, they're going to get a reply from Wendy's that says, hey, we're so sorry. What's the location? We'll look into this for you. If they're getting that sort of customer service for a $7, value meal, they're going to expect that from what they are taking out loans to get from that university. So it's a huge job.
You're listening to For Our Edification. I'm Eddie Francis, and we're talking to Jon-Stephen Stansel. And JS is social media manager extraordinaire. Has been at it. So for a decade, you've been doing this. And so, to you, what is the most important quality to have as far I say it's emotional intelligence, but what about you? What do you think is the most important quality to have, or some of the most important qualities to have for someone who wants to do social media professionally?
Oh, willingness to continue learning. Professional development, it's constant. Social media changes every single day, almost hourly. Every platform has regular updates. There are new trends to follow. New platforms emerge that you have to kind of explore. So, and what worked on one platform today is not going to work tomorrow. So staying up to date and staying current is something that is a major part of a social media manager's job. And I don't think you'd survive long without. Just that willingness to continue and be flexible. One thing, you just never know what's going to happen. So many higher ed social media managers have been really gung-ho and really bullish on TikTok. And all of a sudden, your state legislature, your governor issues an executive order that says no more TikTok on state-owned devices, and suddenly your strategy is done. So how do you pivot? Like today, you were planning a 6-month TikTok strategy, and that is out the window. What are you doing now?
Absolutely.
That's and not pull your hair out when that happens. It's a pretty big deal.
Do users care what the social media person is going through? It doesn't look, I mean, users are it seems like they're just talking to their devices.
Sometimes you will get, and this really plays a part when you're replying and answering it, and if you build that community and people kind of know, like, oh, I don't know who runs the Twitter account, but they are always responsive and always friendly and always helpful. They will come to your aid when times are bad. I've gotten replies when, I think some of the times the most frustrating things about being a social media manager, whether in higher ed or anywhere else, is when your brand makes a decision that you personally disagree with and your audience also disagrees with. Wow, and you cannot say anything about that. You've got to, be the voice of the brand. And people are getting angry, and probably sometimes for legit reasons. But they will actually say, "Hey, no shade to the social media manager, but this move is stupid," And that kind of softens the blow a little bit to see a few of those, and people understand, hey, it's not this. So I mean, I've seen giant stuff where airlines have had, when Southwest Airlines had their big fiasco day, there were so many tweets that were like, "Hey, we know this is not the social media team's fault, but." Get your act together, So I think sometimes people do care, but a lot of times they don't.
Well, and I think it's also, frustrating, and this is something that the customer doesn't see either. And you're completely right, because I've actually been in that situation myself, where I'm sitting here going, we really shouldn't put this on social media. This is a bad idea. And the employer goes, no, you need to put it on social media. And I'm going, watch what happens. And it happens, and I'm sitting there going, told you. And and you can't say anything, because now everything is done. Everything is done. I mean, everybody is out of the pool. Nobody's having a good time anymore. And so that is really one of those things. But it's really interesting to me, when, like I said, when I've done social media, it's one of those things where I've said, I really wish people could see somebody running into my office going, well, my event is happening in about 5 hours and we only have 20 registrants for this thing. So could you please put it on social media so we can get some more people? And I'm going, you did a crappy job putting your event together, honestly, is really the problem. Social media is not the elixir for your poor planning. It's just not, it's not going to solve your problem, but people really believe that is actually how it's going to happen. And then this is the other part, and I really want to hear your thoughts on this. You have, and I have so much empathy for my social media coordinator because I know she has worked out a calendar. I know she knows when everything needs to post. She's figured it out. She's done it. She's been there. She's been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. And somebody comes along and says, no, this press release has to go out now. And I'm sitting there going, do you know how many tweets we have done today? And we are about to we're about to oversaturate our account right now and drive our followers crazy. I mean, talk about when you have to have those behind the scenes conversations with people and they really don't understand that there is an actual strategy that goes into this.
Exactly. Well, it kind of goes back to that idea of like, oh, well, I have my personal account and I do this all the time. Why can't we do this from the brand account? Like, it's totally different, totally different ball game we're playing here. And you're right, the strategy and the planning and the content calendar that goes into it. And then somebody comes along is like, just wants to throw a little wrench into it. And you have to remember, especially, when I was working in higher ed, is just remembering like when people come to you with those requests, it's important to them. Like they think it's the most important thing in the world. And you have to kind of empathize with that a little bit and try and offer another solution. And some of it, it's just constant training of other people on campus to know like, hey, your event's in 5 hours. If I put this on Facebook, it's not going to do you a lick of good right now because the way the algorithm works, there's a good chance nobody's going to see it until tomorrow.
Exactly.
It doesn't work that way. Mm-hmm. I need this a week in advance. And it's kind of tough because the social media managers in higher ed are bottom of the totem pole. It's seen as an entry-level position a lot of times. And they don't have that authority to go to a dean and say, you can't have this.
Yeah.
They should have that authority because in reality, we're not gatekeeping. We are trying to do what's best for the brand as a whole and be sure everybody gets their time. Everybody gets their moment in the spotlight, but we are, again, back to the city metaphor. We're not focusing on one element over another. Right. And this is also comes down to in higher ed, a big problem of where does social media fit within the org chart? Because naturally, no matter where you are in the org chart, that area is probably going to get a little more preference. I've been in universities where it's changed. Like we started out under enrollment management, and then another department was like, hey, a VP gets really upset and is like, they're not doing enough for our area, and it gets moved because somebody pitched a big fit, and suddenly the other department's not getting enough on theirs, and the other one's getting too much. And this social media manager and marketing is kind of stuck in the middle. Like, hey, we want to give everybody, but we can't say no to our direct supervisor.
Yeah.
I love you, but he signs my paycheck. So yeah, it's really tough. And some of it just continues of like, for higher ed social media managers, making those relationships across campus and letting people know, like, once a semester, I would do like a lunch and learn of like, hey, this is how social media works at the university. This is what we do. Yeah. This is our strategy. And the more people would come to that, and even if people didn't show up, the people who did would spread the gospel for me, like, hey, I went to this great lunch and learn at JS. You need to send him that now and not the day of the event. And that helps out a lot. You still get those, and sometimes you need a boss that will back you up and be like, yeah, I'm going to say no for you. So
I'm going to put you in a crappy position, JS.
Okay.
We're listening to For Our Edification, and we're talking to Jon-Stephen Stansel, and JS is a director of social media at Chaotic Good Studios. Love that name, by the way. Okay, social media. Where do you find that you have a smoother path to do your job effectively? Was it in higher ed, or has it been in the private sector? This is me.
Private sector all the way.
I was gonna say this was my curiosity, and you gave me the answer. I thought I would. Yeah. What is the difference though? It's so funny to me that
it baffles me because it goes to the Kissinger quote, like, campus politics is so vicious because the stakes are so low. and it does because people are very passionate about what they do and they care about it, and that's very good. But also, there's sometimes of like, hey, the bake sale you're having, right? For the accounting club doesn't need to go on the main university page. I know
So
it's important to you,
yeah, yeah.
right?
Or this is my
Yeah.
favorite one that Ariane Pierre, my social media coordinator, we talk about this all the time. It's like, we're gonna start a TikTok account. Okay, hold on, hold on, Department of Music. Why are you gonna start a TikTok account? Which it would make sense for music, but I'm just gonna pick one. Why are you gonna start a TikTok account? Oh, because and one of the students is gonna run it. Hold on. Do not do that. And the next thing you know, all of a sudden they start this account, and you're sitting there and you're going, I told them 6 months ago this was a bad idea, and they've posted a grand total of 5 times, and it's 6 months later.
And they can be a liability to the brand as well.
A
You
huge
have all of these
liability.
students put I go to speak at university classes and talk to young people who want to go into social media management. And every time I'm like, ask them, like, who do you think is doing well on social media? And they're like Wendy's and Duolingo. And as much as I love both of those accounts, your music department that's run by a student does not need to be emulating Duolingo. Like, that does not need to happen. So that is a big issue. And then back to kind of the point about what is more difficult, higher ed or private sector. I never in a million years thought working on a big budget movie, The Social, for something that's costing millions of dollars, would be less stressful than running social media for a small university in the middle of Arkansas. It is. It's unbelievable. You would think if Hollywood, like, egos, and there are many, would be play, and there'd be all kinds of pressure and things like that. And there is. I don't want to minimize that, because it's still it can be very stressful, but it's so much less than when I was a social media manager in higher ed. I don't know why that is, but also there are, it kind of comes down to like the city stuff. There's constant, complaints about parking. There's PR crises. There's actual physical, there's no snow days for a movie, right? There's no canceling class because there's no tornado that hits campus
Right,
when you're
right.
doing. There are PR crises and other things which I've had to deal with that are, very stressful. But um, it's interesting to me that higher ed is so much more intense
Well,
on
and
that
and
than other areas.
and it's so hard for higher ed to pivot. In the private sector, when you got to pivot, you pivot. You just go. You just go. Everybody gets in a room, gets in a war room. Everybody puts it all out on the conference table. You're sitting here going, we got to pivot. Let's pivot. Let's go. You go to your office, do your thing. You go to your office, you do your thing. You go to your office, do your thing. And everybody just seems to know what they have to do. And even when they make a mistake, they can pull it back quickly, or they can say, you know what? Let's move on. It was a mistake. We screwed up. And then they just go ahead and they move on. But I mean, with higher ed, that's the other. I think with higher ed, when you make a mistake, it just seems to live forever. you know, um, and I think the other part is that higher ed has so little appreciation for marketing, and so little understanding, and such an unsophisticated view of marketing. Because often the problem is that we're the arts and crafts shop. And so, and social media is the fun, cute little thing we do because, oh, look at our accounts, oh, look at how much we've grown in the past month. And you're sitting there going, yeah, well, that's nice, but that's not it. And the social media person, who is often a young person who's probably graduated 4 or 5 years out of college or something like that, they're like the
They
kid
were a
on
student
campus.
at that university a year ago, right?
Yeah, and unfortunately, they're often seen as one of the kids on campus. And it's like, no, this isn't a kid. This is a professional who's really, really having to work this account and block and tackle for an entire brand. And that's where I often see the frustration. That's why I'm always asking my social media coordinator, hey, how's it going? How are you? What do I need to do? Do you need a day? What do we need to do? Have you planned everything? Come in tomorrow at noon. You know, it's stuff like that, because it just seems like such a pressure cooker.
And that's a big one too, because on so many campuses, you have a social media person for the entire campus, and social media doesn't end at 5, you know, especially with students who are up all hours and have questions and things are going out, and it's a constant thing, and higher ed really isn't equipped to handle that. You know, for staff, it's like, okay, you have to be in your office from 9 to 5 every day. You know, my last job, they're very strict about the dress code, like shirt tucked in, you know, wearing slacks, no casual Fridays. And it's just like, you know what?
Oh God, no.
Oh, I know. And it's just kind of like, well, you know what? I was running all weekend. It was graduation, and you know, I was working the accounts all weekend. Oh, here's some flex time. You know, you can come in late a couple days this week. Like, you know what? I've got a 6-year-old kid. I need more than that. You know, so you know, it's giving the people the balance and the flexibility. You know, oh, hey, work remote today, or hey, take Friday off, or heaven forbid, like pay people overtime instead of giving them flex time. Like, I know higher ed can't do that a lot, but like, hey, I mean, there's sometimes the job requires so much, you can't take that time off. So people do need to be compensated fairly for that.
So you have somebody right
flex
now.
Time's not always enough.
so you have somebody right now who's about to graduate. They have the bomb TikTok account, but they're saying that they want to be social media managers somewhere. What's your advice to them?
Volunteer. You know, get an account, run an account professionally, and use your personal accounts to talk about what you do, and get involved with the community of social media managers. As much as I don't think social media managers should be work for exposure, finding a good cause that needs a volunteer is a great way to get that experience, and you know, learn from it. Internships are great; they should be paid. But my feeling on internships is, not only should you be paid, it shouldn't just be, oh, you're the intern, here's our social media password, run the show. Because honestly, you're going to have to unlearn a lot of stuff that you have done wrong if you do that. You need to intern under a professional social media manager who can provide that guidance for you. You, like I was saying before, use those personal accounts to showcase what you have done, to talk about things that interest you on social media, for a couple of reasons. One, when you apply for social media manager positions, people are definitely going to look at your personal accounts, good or bad. Like, I like to say, be professionally authentic. Like, you can, you know, I would not have gotten the job on Invincible if I had not talked about comic books in addition to social media. So my personality actually ended up paying off, because somebody followed me and said, oh, he knows his social media and he's a comic book nerd, let's give him a call. Get on there and talk about you. Reach out to other social media managers. You know, go, hey, look up and find out who's running social media at whatever brand that you admire, and talk to them. I'd love to talk to people on it. So making those connections and networking before you need it is incredibly important.
Jon-Stephen Stansel, my boy, he is the director of social media at Chaotic Good Studios. And thank you for joining us for our edification, my friend.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.
By the way, you like my background? Try and see something. So that great artist, Prince, once said, we live in a world overrun by tourists. Tourists, they look at life through a pocket camera. What? No flash again? Social media is kind of the same way, isn't it? I mean, people take a look at the world through a pretty limited lens, and that lens is their own personal experience. But we're kind of tricked into thinking that our personal experience could translate to everybody. As someone who has worked in mass comm and mass media, let me remind you of something, or let me educate you about something that you may not know about. Once upon a time, if you wanted to reach the masses through a microphone, you had to take a test for the Federal Communications Commission. Yes, you had to take an FCC test just to crack a mic. That is because people wanted to make sure that you were prepared to show some level of responsibility once you got on a mic. You represent a brand. That is one hell of a responsibility. It's not just about you. If you're the type who likes to go for the nuclear option first when you get upset, well, if you get upset, that's you and your account, and you suffer whatever consequence that honestly you just may not feel because it's just you. But for a brand, it's way different because you're representing more than yourself, something bigger than yourself. So if you want to apply for a job in social media management, go ahead, but think about whether or not you are ready to represent a whole lot of people. Many thanks to my man, Jon-Stephen Stansel, for joining me for our edification. If you want to find out more about JS, go to jsstansel.com. His address is right there in the show notes. And of course, if you want to check out past episodes of For Our Edification, please do so. Just go to eddiefrancis.com/for our edification, rate it, share it, and yeah, get some feedback. Would love to hear your feedback and read it too. For the very lovely Dr. Halima Leek Francis, I'm Eddie Francis. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of For Our Edification.